Hi, I'm Steve from CBT Nuggets, and this nugget continues through the Prince2 themes. This nugget is focused on plans, project plans, stage plans, and the processes to be followed to create effective Prince2 plans. In this nugget, again, Prince2 plans, continuing on our discussion of the Prince2 themes, we're going to discuss why do we need to plan? Why is planning so important? Why does Prince2 provide such a focus on project planning? We'll also discuss specifically what a plan is. A lot of people think a project plan is simply the schedule, or often referred to as a Gantt chart. A plan is much more than just a schedule. A plan is the schedule, but it's the scope, it's the budget, it is the schedule, it's the risk, it's the communications, it's everything we do in project planning consolidated into a single document. We'll talk about the various levels of Prince2 defines. We have project plans, we have stage plans, we may have team plans, and we have that thing that we hope we never have to encounter, which is the exception plan. We'll talk about two approaches to planning defined in Prince2. The preferred or recommended approach is the product planning approach, but the unfortunately more common approach to planning is the work breakdown or the work-based planning approach. And finally, we'll review the specific steps that Prince2 defines as being critical for developing effective project plans. I'm hoping that by now, through this Nugget series, that this topic of why plan should be self-evident. But just to ensure that you have a full understanding of why we have such a focus on planning in Prince2, it's because if we can't measure it, we can't manage it. And if it's not defined, i.e. there is not a plan in place, it's undefined. So if we simply go into our project and say our goal is to develop a new inventory management system, and evidence suggests, a web search says, we should be able to develop an inventory management system in 6 months. If that's our plan, that's not measurable because it's not defined. We got our 6-month target from a wish list from the business that says, I need this new solution in place in 6 months' time. Or we did a quick web search and said, the average length of time to develop a new inventory management system is 6 months. But we absolutely can't manage to that. How do we know at month 1 and month 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 that we're on target? So therefore, we can't measure the undefined, and if it's undefined, it's not in a plan. And maybe that's a self-evident truism, but the real reason we define the project plan is so that we can measurement in place so that we can predict the results. So that at month 1, we can say the project is on track, or the project is a day late, or the project is a day early. At month 2, the project is on track, or at this point we're running 3 days early, and so on and so on. And we only can do that degree of reporting and status validation is if we have a plan to measure against. So basically, the plan defines the targets. When are we going to complete analysis? Week 6. When are we going to complete design? Week 12. When are we going to complete? It's defining all of the targets that can be used for the measurement purposes to ensure that, again, we plan for success. We plan to succeed. And we can only manage against the success and succeeding is if we have the targets to measure against. In detail, we need to plan so we can identify the work packages so that we can identify the resources needed to do it. It's going to be the human resources, and it's also going to be the other resources. The equipment, the materials, the supplies, everything required to be needed to be used to complete the project is also going to be identified in our planning process. With all of the work packages and our resources and the effort complete the job, we can then define the schedule. And as I've just discussed, part of the reason we plan is to define the resources so that we can work with HR, we can work with purchasing, we can work with suppliers to ensure that we have all of the resources necessary to create the project plan. But the bottom line is, why do we plan? We plan for success. And without a plan, I would humbly suggest we will never have success. Now, it's true, sometimes we can stumble onto success without a plan, but the odds of having success without a plan is extremely low, but the odds of having success with a plan should be extremely high. So hopefully I've fully convinced you that planning is important. So what is a plan? A lot of people think of a plan as simply the schedule. It's again, the Gantt chart, to use a project management terminology, which defines the tasks against a calendar where we have the bars that identify when the tasks are going to be completed across the timeline of the project. That is part of a project plan, but a project plan is much, much more than just the schedule, or again, the Gantt chart, to use, again, a common term that's used in project management. A plan is comprehensive. A proper plan in Prince2 is going to fully define the scope, exactly what it is and what is not to be created by the project. It will identify the schedule. The schedule is part of the plan, but it's not exclusive. A plan is also going to identify the budget, the quality, the risks, the resources, the communications, basically everything we do when we initiate the project. In initiating the project is packaged into the plan. It's a complete, comprehensive document that defines the total project environment. And Prince2 recognizes that we need to plan at different levels. The first level of project planning is the project plan. And again, this is the total environment from start to completion of the project. It is the scope, it is the schedule, it is the budget, it is the resources, it is everything, and this is the basis on approval, or for approval. We present the project plan to the project board, to senior management, and we get approval to proceed, and we recognize that the project plan is going to improve in precision. At startup, we're going to say it's plus or minus 100%. After analysis, it's going to improve. It's going to be plus or minus 50% because we have more details and more information about the project and some work done. By the end of design, it's going to be plus or minus 25% and so on. So the project plan is evolutionary. The project plan is not a one-time document that's produced at the beginning of the project and never referred to again. Again, you've been through all of the processes of Prince2. You have a firm understanding that we're going to review and update and revise the project plan at the end of every stage. The next process, or the next part of planning that we've already again reviewed in our processes, is we need to have a stage plan that's going to define the specific environment for the stage. So it's going to identify all of the work packages and the scope and the risks and the budget and the human resources and the everything else. Again, a stage plan, again, is not just a schedule. A stage plan is a comprehensive statement of the total environment within which the stage is going to be produced. And a stage plan should be plus or minus a very small number. I'm going to say 5%, maybe 10%, giving us some allowance for estimating error. But generally speaking, a stage plan, because it's only focused on the very immediate horizon, the next weeks or maybe months of the project, should be very specific and very accurate. Depending on the size and complexity of our project, we may or may not need, so I'm going to say this team plan is optional. A team plan would be required if there are multiple teams involved with delivering our project, or the degree of complexity within the stage is high enough that we need to break it down to another level of precision. And the team plan, again, is going to be the specific environment within which the team, which is a subset of my total project, is going to execute. And those are our forward-facing project plans as defined by Prince2. The other plan, and as I said in the introduction, I hope you never have to produce, but in all likelihood, at some point in your project management career, you will probably have to produce at least one exception plan, and I hope I haven't jinxed you in saying that. I wish you great luck that you never have to produce an exception plan. I've had more than a few in my life. It's inevitable, especially with IT projects, because we have so many challenges with IT projects. The exception plan identifies why we had challenges, and it replans for success. And again, in our previous nuggets, we've explained exactly what an exception plan is and how we develop an exception plan. So I'm not going to go into a lot more detail of that. Again, the focus for this one is on the Prince2 themes for planning. The key understanding is we have at least 3 levels of planning for the go forward, and we also have the exception plan. Another concept of Prince2 planning that you definitely need to be aware of for your Prince2 exam, because I would expect, again, there will be questions on your Prince2 exam around the 2 planning approaches for project planning, stage planning. The recommended planning approach in Prince2 is product-based planning. So we identify the project's product. And I'm going to say S. Obviously, the key output is going to be the final code that's going to be produced, but then we're going to introduce or identify all of the sub-products, the training documents, the conversion processes, the design documents, the analysis documents, and so on. So we're going to create the product breakdown structure. And with that, we're then going to write the descriptions. So we're going to write the product descriptions. And finally, we're going to create the product flowchart. And the product flowchart is going to say we have the analysis document, which is going to produce the design document and the database design document and the training plan. And the design document is going to create, so we're going to create the product flowchart to identify not just the end result of our project, but all of the subproducts and the product breakdown structure and how one flows into the other. And that is the recommended approach for Prince2 planning, is product planning. And that's the Prince2 term. I stick the word deliverable in the front of that because product to me is very synonymous with deliverable. So again, I'm just trying to use both terms, so depending on the organizational culture, whether you consider the results of your project work to be products, or whether you consider the results of your project work to be deliverables. And this is the recommended approach. And the reason this is the recommended approach is, why are we taking on the project? What is this project to produce? The project is to produce results, i.e. the project is to produce the product. So what better way to plan our project than to identify the project products and all of the subproducts required to do it as we work our way through the product descriptions and the product flowchart. That's the recommended approach. Unfortunately, my experience, and again, maybe I've had a bit of sheltered life, but my experience is, although this is the preferred approach for project planning, my experience is a lot of people will take more the traditional work-based planning approach, where we start with our systems development lifecycle. And the systems development lifecycle has a complete work breakdown structure identified. So we take analysis that says we need to do a current situation. We need to do an evaluation of alternatives, and on and on and on, and then we have design. So our SDLC identifies all of the work required, and the work produces the deliverables, but this is really going with the backwards approach. Here we're trying to identify all of the work, and from the work we're going to get the deliverables, and if we don't identify all of the work that's necessary, we may miss and I'm going to pick a pretty obvious one here, we may miss a key deliverable for our project that we don't do any database design, simply because our SDLC, or our attempt to identify all of the work-based planning, never considered the need for doing a database design. And again, I picked a pretty obvious one. I don't think any IT project is going to be as blatant or as obvious as missing the database design, but I think the intent is there. If you do a work-based planning approach, the risk is, if you don't identify the work, you don't produce the deliverables, and therefore there will be something missing, i.e. no database, in our final solution. If we take the deliverable product-based approach, we look what our end result is going to be, and then we decompose backwards from the end result to identify all of the subproducts, the product breakdown structure, and eventually the product flowchart. And from that, we can then create the work packages required to complete the analysis document, and the work packages required to complete the design documents, and so on. So in a perfect world, if we don't make any mistakes and we don't miss anything, the net plan, the sum of all of the work packages from a product planning approach or from a work planning approach will be identical, because the deliverables result in work packages or the work packages result in deliverables. And as long as we don't make any mistakes, they're going to be synonymous. But there should be less risk with doing the product-based approach, which is why Prince2 recommends it. But again, my experience is more people will start with a systems development lifecycle approach and use a work-based planning approach. And our final discussion, but a very significant discussion in this nugget, is what does Prince2 identify as the planning steps? And I'm going to suggest these planning steps apply whether we're going to do a product planning approach or whether we're going to do a work planning approach. In the planning steps, first we design the plan. What is the nature of, what is the style of, what are our organizational norms for planning? With that in mind, we're going to define the products, and the products may be the actual products, or the products may be the SDLC, phases, and activities. So this is where we can support either approach using these planning steps. From that, whether we're using the product approach or the SDLC phases, we're going to identify all of the activities and tasks and work packages and individual assignments necessary for the team to get the job done, and we're going to identify all of the dependencies, that we must do A before we can do B. If we're building a house, we must build the foundation before we can put on the main floor, and we must put up the walls before we can install the roof. And those are some pretty obvious dependencies, but in our projects we need to identify all of those dependencies, because we're going to take this and put it into a piece of automated software, project scheduling software, and the project scheduling software doesn't know the difference between putting the roof on first or building the foundation first. We're going to identify the resources and prepare the estimates, and from that we're going to put it into our project scheduling software. We're going to let the project scheduling software develop our plan, and then we're going to document it. And this is the comprehensive, all-inclusive scope, schedule, budget, human resource, risk component, as I already discussed for the project plan. And over here on the side is a comprehensive planning step that's going to appear throughout our entire planning process, which is identifying the risks. During project planning, we are really taking out the microscope and we're examining everything required to get the job done. We're identifying the products, the activities, the dependencies, the estimates, and that's going to identify lots of risks and lots of assumptions. So we need to keep an eye for risk identification and ensure that we're doing effective risk management throughout our entire planning process, or as per this nugget, through the planning theme. And to drill in just a little more detail in each of those steps, first we're going to look at designing the plan. The first thing we're going to do in designing the plan is identify the levels of planning need. Obviously, we need a project plan. And following Prince2, unless this is going to be a single stage project, which is possible, we need to have stage plans. So as a given, all Prince2 projects are going to require both a master project plan and a number of stage plans. But we're going to then identify whether we need team plans, whether we need sub-team plans, and what extra level of decomposition we need to level the plan to a manageable level. We're also going to identify the tools that we need for planning, i.e., I would recommend we need automated project scheduling software. And whether your organizational norms is to use desktop software, web-based software, distributed software, but you need to identify all of the tools that we need to manage a project of this size and complexity. And different size and complexity projects may require or should require different tools. If this is a very simple project, as much as I hate to say it, maybe you can manage it with a spreadsheet. And I really hate to say that because I've seen far too many large, complex projects attempt to be scheduled using a spreadsheet. I believe we need to have some automated project scheduling software. Spreadsheets are probably good for a 2-week project and not much more. But again, even within the automated project scheduling software, there are different levels of project scheduling software and different complexities. Can I get away with a single license on my own personal desktop? Or do I need a distributed project scheduling tool that myself and all of my team leaders can access? Can I merge projects? Can I combine projects? Do I have third-party projects? So again, I simply need to go out and find the right tools, and we need to understand to identify what the planning norms are going to be. And one could say the norm is, I want a good, comprehensive, reliable, deliverable plan. And that's certainly a true statement. But when I'm talking about project norms, the key thing I'm going to talk about is resource availability. And to put that more simplistic, what does full-time mean? And to keep this simple, I'm going to assume we work an 8-hour day. We work 5 days a week, so we have 40 hours of time available from every single resource that's assigned to my project full time. But is that realistic? 40 hours a week times 52 weeks? Totally unrealistic. There's this thing called vacation. So how do we account for team members' vacation? There's this other thing that's most likely going to happen called sick. What is our expectation to provide or to manage our project around sick time? And there's the other duties as assigned because we are part of a large organization. So even if I have a full-time team member, I would suggest a 40-hour work week, a 40-hour planning norm is unrealistic. I think a 35-hour work week is probably still unrealistic, but what is the right number? Is it 32? Is it 30? Is it 25? What are the norms in your organization specific to project planning? And one of the most extreme circumstances I ever worked with, I worked with the military at one point in time, did some project training for them. And this particular unit of the military had very, very rapid turnover of their staff, that a person could be expected to be posted to this particular unit for a maximum of 2 years. So they spent significant amount of time either doing startup training or cross-training to the incoming team member. And their project norm on a 40-hour work week was 15 hours of time for dedicated staff, 100% focused on my project. I could expect to get no more than 15 hours of project work out of them because they were involved for the other 30 or 25 hours of their week, either doing standard military exercises because it was an active unit, or they were doing training, or they were doing cross-training, or they were doing. So again, what are your planning norms? What can I expect from my project team, and how am I going to develop that? And I'm going to identify the risk approach. What am I going to do with risk? And to me, the simple answer for this, and we will have more discussion in a later nugget on risk, is risk built in or is risk managed externally? And I don't want to go into a lot of detail on it right now because we have an entire nugget later in the series focused on risk. But if risk is built in, if we believe we have a risky task, the task has a 40-hour estimate on it. If we build it in, we're going to say there is risk on that task. My original estimate was 40 hours, but I'm going to automatically make the task 60 hours long to build the risk in. Or is the risk going to be managed externally, that I'm going to keep the task at 40 hours, but somewhere I'm going to build contingency into the project plan, and I'm going to extend a milestone, I'm going to extend a deliverable, I'm going to manage expectations that somewhere I have hidden or managed externally the possibility that I'm going to have a 20-hour delay on the project. Our next step in project planning or in planning is to define the products. I don't think I need to spend a lot of time on this particular component because we've talked about products a lot through this Nugget series to date. Prince2 is absolutely a product-based approach, but we're going to identify all of the work and all of the deliverables that are required to complete the project. We're going to identify all of the dependencies between those deliverables. So the analysis document must be done before we can do the design document or the database design document. Or again, my housing example, the foundation must be in place before we can build the main floor, before we can build the walls, before we can put up the roof. And we're going to identify any unique quality expectations for our products. So nothing new or different in planning that we haven't already discussed in products. As a matter of fact, all of the work around defining the products has most likely been done prior to the project management team actively taking on the planning steps. But if they haven't been done as part of planning, we absolutely have to ensure that all of this work around the products is in place. With all of the key work components, the phases identified from our SDLC, or probably more appropriately all of the products defined from our product-based planning, we then need to do the further decomposition to identify all of the activities and the work packages and the tasks to truly complete the work packages. So simply saying my work package is an analysis document, that's great, that's the work package, but what does it take to produce an analysis document? We need to conduct interviews, we need to review documentation, so this is where we decompose all of the activities, all of the deliverables, all of the products into true work packages or tasks. Again, depending on what terminology is most commonly used in your organization. And we need to continue to decompose the activities into sub-activities, into sub-sub-activities, into sub-sub-sub-activities, into work packages, and maybe even into assignable tasks until the last level of decomposition has it assignable and estimatable. We need to assign it to a resource. So we need to say Harry or Mary or Fred is going to work on this particular work package, and we need to be able to estimate that it's going to take Mary 40 hours to get the job done. And we need to have a high degree of confidence that the task can be completed in this. So typically, when we're talking estimatable, we're talking in the 5 to 10 day range. And if the estimate is much higher than 10 days, we probably need to do a further level of decomposition. And if we get and identify that our estimates are beginning to be in 4 hours and 6 hours, we've probably done too much decomposition, and we may need to do a little bit of aggregation. But we continue to identify all of the activities and work packages and tasks to decompose our work streams or our product streams until they're assignable to a resource and estimatable, with our target for estimating being 5 to 10 days. And then we document the work package dependencies. We must conduct the interviews before we can produce the interview notes. We must have all of the interview notes validated before we can summarize the results. And as obvious as some of those dependencies will be to ourselves as intelligent human beings, remembering that we're going to take all of these work packages and put them into a piece of software that has no intelligence. We need to truly identify all of the dependencies for all of the work packages, but I'm going to focus on this concept of mandatory dependencies only. We may say, ideally I think it would be really good to do that before this. Well, if it's an ideal, it's not a mandatory, and we don't want to build it into our project plan. We also don't want to build resource dependencies. Well, Mary is working on these 3 tasks, so ideally Mary should work on this one, before this one, before this one. There's no true dependencies. If there are no true dependencies, the only dependency is that Mary only has 8 hours a day. Do not build them in. Truly build in the mandatory dependencies only. I can't put up the roof until I build the walls. I can't build the walls until I put on the floor. I can't put on the floor until I put up or build the foundation or create the foundation. But there are other tasks in that building a house project plan that are not in that true dependency task. We have the inside walls. We have the cupboards. We have a whole bunch of other things that have no relationship to being able to put the roof on the house. They shouldn't be in that dependency stream. We may have the same carpenters building the inside walls and the closets and the cupboards and all of this stuff that has absolutely no bearing on making a structural roof. So mandatory dependencies only. And I'm going to put this message in here. I know you've just finished the nugget on quality. Ensure that when you're identifying all of the activities and dependencies that we put in the quality work package, that there's time for peer reviews. There's time for the inspections. And I'm not going to repeat the nugget on quality, but this is the point in time where we build quality into our project work breakdown structure by ensuring that all of these quality work packages are included in the total project picture. So once we have all of the work packages identified, we then prepare the estimates. And this is not necessarily a serial process. We can develop the estimates for the work packages at the same time as we're developing the work packages, but they do go hand in hand. As part of developing the estimates or preparing the estimates, first thing is we need to identify the resources. And I've been using named resources, Mary or Harry or so on, but more likely we're going to say it's a senior analyst, or it's a junior programmer, or it's a DBA, where we identify the resources typically based on skills. That way we have some flexibility when we work with human resources to identify and to assign the senior resource or the junior programmers or the DBAs required for our project. We may do it by name, but the more generic approach to doing this is by the skills. Once we know the skill sets that this task is going to be done by a senior analyst, we can develop the estimates. It's going to take them 65 hours to do this particular task. Again, the expectation is the estimate is going to be somewhere in the 5 to 10 day range. We're going to develop estimates, and finally we're going to document our confidence. I have a lot of confidence in developing these estimates. I have brought in subject matter experts. I have brought in my corporate best practices. I have used a proven estimating approach. I have a very high degree of confidence. I think my estimates are at the 95% level of confidence. We should be good. Or never done a project like this anywhere in our organization. We have no subject matter experts. We have no corporate best practices. I've done a web search. And frankly, although I found lots of evidence on the web, I'm a little concerned. I think some of them are questionable quality, and therefore these are my estimates, but I really don't have a lot of confidence in them. I'm going to give you at best a 50%, which is immediately identified as a risk event. So now all of the hard work is done. We've identified all of the work packages, we've identified all of the dependencies, we've identified the resources and the estimates. Now we're simply going to plug it into the tool, and we're going to let the tool do its magic. If only it were as simple as that. My experience of using project scheduling software is it's a very frustrating environment to work in. I often say that project scheduling software is a tool that I love to hate, but I hate to love because I can't do my job without project scheduling software, but it is a frustrating environment. A suggestion that I'm going to give you is we need to follow the KISS method. We need to keep it simple, Steve. And again, we've often heard of following the KISS approach of keeping it as simple as possible, meaning don't build a lot of complexity into using the tool. We can create predecessor successor relationships, we can put gaps, we can put overlaps, we can put part-time resources, we can over allocate, we can do all kinds of magic things to come up with a very aggressive project plan. But doing all of that fancy stuff simply takes time, and my experience is we're probably going to get a better plan if we keep it simple, because we also have to recognize that we're going to maintain this plan for the life of the project. So for 6 months or 12 months or 18 months or however long your project is, we're going to maintain that plan on a regular basis as a minimum at the end of every stage. And we're going to maintain the stage plan weekly throughout the stage. So if we do a lot of fancy stuff, if we do a lot of gaps and overlaps and multiple dependencies and complex dependency chains, it may make total sense to us during the calm and quiet of project planning. But 6 months, 4 months, 5 months into the project, as we're trying to understand why changing an estimate or changing a resource assignment isn't having the impact or the results that we expect, it's probably because we made our project plan too complex. So keep it as simple as possible, follow the KISS approach, and be prepared to level the resources. You want to have your resources working at, let's assume we pick the standard of 35 hours is a realistic estimate for a full-time resource. We want to have every resource working as close to 35 hours a week, every week, based on resource assignments, task estimates, and dependencies. And be prepared to iterate, because this aspect of leveling the resources while keeping it simple is going to take try after try after try to get it done. You're going to run the project plan, you're going to come up with a project schedule, and you're going to find that Mary is only working 12 hours a week on average. So you're going to reassign some of Harry's work to Mary, and then all of a sudden, yes, they're both working 35 hours, but we have now a huge gap in the project plan as a result of dependencies. And Harry is sitting waiting for Mary to complete some work, and Harry has no other work to be done. So then we have to change our dependencies or rechange our assignments. So basically be prepared to keep it as simple as possible, because we're going to iterate and we're going to work on try after try after try. But the bottom line is use some software, take the information you have at hand, plug it into the software, and let the software do its magic and come up with a realistic, achievable project schedule. And finally, the truly easy task, or at least I hope it's the truly easy task, is simply pull it all together. Into a formal document. We're going to take the quality approach, the communications approach, the risk approach, the scope statement, the project schedule, and we're going to pull it all into the formal document. And recognizing that it's more than just the schedule. It's everything we've done in initiate the project. It's everything required to define the total environment for the project. And we're going to present it, and we need to be prepared to maintain the plan at every stage. So as we're developing and documenting this project plan, keep an eye for how we can format this. How can we create it? How can we put it together in a way that's going to support easy and effective ongoing, and I'm going to almost use the word perpetual maintenance throughout the project. And a key statement is all of those little things, all of those risks, all of those concerns that we had throughout the project, all of the assumptions that we made as we're producing the work packages to lead up to this overall project plan, put them into the project plan. The assumptions are part of the plan. Dear Project Board, here's my estimates. I've made these estimates based on the assumption of the information I gathered from the web, but my estimating confidence is only 50% because of document it all, so that everyone understands the foundation on which the project plan has been created. And you thought you were done, didn't you? I said the final task is document the plan. Well, we have this one other planning step that happens throughout the planning process, and that's identifying the risks. And the reason it happens throughout, planning is a very significant source of risk. We are focused on what it takes to be successful. And as we're focused on planning, as we're focused on what it takes to be successful, we're going to identify all of the risk. The risk is we've never done this before. The risk is I've talked to human resources and there may be a shortage of staff. The risk is the business has some unrealistic or potentially unrealistic performance requirements. The risk is we need to capture and deal with all of the risks during the planning process, and a lot of that means changing the plan to eliminate the risk. So if we have a concern that we're going to have a shortage of resources, maybe we need to change the plan and use less resources. If we have a concern that there's going to be performance constraints on the project, maybe we need to change the plan and change our technology and buy the additional hardware. But as we're identifying the risks throughout the entire planning process, we need to capture and deal with the risks, even if dealing with the risks means changing the plan to eliminate the risk. Well, we are done now. This concludes our nugget on the Prince2 plans theme. In this nugget, we talked about why do we plan? We plan to succeed. And we plan to succeed by identifying the work, and then we measure success against the plan. And by measuring the success, we can actually predict that at month 1, we're on target. At month 2, we're 2 weeks ahead of schedule. At month 3, we're 1 week ahead of schedule. So we're planning to succeed. So we're planning to create the process that we can measure and evaluate our success against the plan. And a plan is more than a schedule. A plan is comprehensive. A plan identifies the scope, it identifies the schedule, it identifies the budget, it identifies the quality, it identifies the risks, it identifies everything we do to document and define what it is the project is being undertaken to accomplish. We've discussed that we plan at multiple levels. We have a project plan, created initially and maintained throughout. We have stage plans that are produced for each stage. We may need team plans and sub-team plans depending on the size and complexity of our project. And we have exception plans that are going to be created when our actual project delivery results run out of tolerance. We discussed we have 2 planning approaches. We have the preferred, which is product-based planning, where we identify the work packages, the product that needs to be delivered, and then we decompose that into the product breakdown structure, and we create the product flow diagram. Or we also have the work-based planning approach, where we identify something like a systems development lifecycle, a standardized list of tasks, and we identify all of the tasks appropriate for our project. And then finally, we discuss the planning steps, where we put together the approach for developing the project plan. We first design the plan. We understand the level of planning and the nature of planning to be done in our organization. Then we identify all of the products that our project is going to produce. We identify the specific activities around producing all of the products. We develop the estimate for completing all of the work packages. We plug that into our project scheduling software. We develop the project schedule, expecting to iterate it and produce a perfect project plan, and then finally we document all of that and produce the formal project plan that's going to go to the project board for approval. And throughout all of the planning steps, we have comprehensive ongoing risk management, because the planning steps is where we have the microscope turned on and we're examining the project at the minute detail, and we're identifying all of those risks and all of those assumptions that are going to be necessary to allow our project to complete successfully. This concludes our nugget on the Prince2 Plans theme. I hope this module was informative for you, and thank you very much for viewing.